Bill. And let me welcome everybody to this ELPC Thinks webinar with Illinois Senior Senator Dick Durbin. I'm Howard Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Law and Policy Center. ELPC Thinks is where we bring together political leaders, experts, environmental leaders, community partners together on strategies for the future. A quick heads up, we're recording this on Facebook so that people can hear this if they can't make it today. And we're honored today to have U.S. Senator Dick Durbin joining us. We know Senator Durbin as the Illinois Senior Senator and his work as the convener of the bipartisan Illinois congressional delegation and the work he does on infrastructure, climate change, protecting the Great Lakes. In Washington, D.C., Senator Durbin is a Senate leader among the Democrats. He's one of the two leaders with Senator Schumer of leading the Senate Democratic Caucus. And that's an incredibly important set of responsibilities in Washington that sometimes folks in Chicago and Illinois aren't entirely aware of. But we are very aware of the great things you do, Senator. So thank you for joining us. And can you bring us up to speed on what happened in Glasgow, where you and 18 senators were at the climate talks, what's happening on the infrastructure legislation? And I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks for your friendship and your leadership. And ELPC is looked to, at least viewed by the congressional delegation, as one of the flagship efforts on environmental policy. So keep up your good work, and a pat on the back to your supporters and those who are working to make your agenda relevant every single day. Glasgow was an interesting undertaking because we had three different congressional delegations from the Senate, and then came Nancy Pelosi with her own delegation. So if you want to know whether the United States Congress showed the flag, we did in very meaningful ways. For those who were not there, it looked to me to be the equivalent of a political convention, with thousands of people milling around with the same general purpose, but each kind of in their own orbit. And we would come together for meetings, exchanges, or for speeches and discussions, and it spent a day doing that. So I'm not going to suggest that we were there for days or weeks. We were not. We were there for a brief period. The several things that came through were, I think, memorable. One, we met with the Chinese delegation. It was our first meeting. I may get the man's name wrong, but I'll refer to him in general terms so you know who I'm speaking of. The general spokesman for the Chinese, I believe, was Shi Wenhua. I may have that wrong. I apologize if I did. He has been a partner of John Kerry for years. He talked about his experience with John Kerry in fraternity terms. I mean, oh, sure, well, I remember the great time we met, this and that and the other and so forth. And he said, pointedly, we've met 28 or 29 times. Well, that's saying something. And I'm told that he was brought out of retirement, that he had this great record of negotiation with Kerry and had decided to call it quits. But when Kerry was reassigned by President Biden, Wenhua was reassigned. Of all the things he said, most of them were generalities, but he said one thing twice, very pointed to us as we asked questions. He volunteered it. He said, that President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement really hurt the world. I mean, he was very pointed in saying that, and then repeated it at the end, which I think was kind of a jibe at us in terms of your great democracy. And here you have a president who walks away from Paris and tell us that we're not participating. You walked away for 4 years. Now you're back. We're glad. Let's talk again. We then met with John Kerry, and he, if the word's indefatigable, it applies to him. He is constantly at it, and I think very effective in what he is doing. We had meetings with different delegations and different groups throughout the days of our time there, and then had, I thought, a very great meeting with Al Gore. Gore came in and addressed our combined delegations as only he can do. We all know his background. I won't bore you with it. I'll just tell you that when I first started in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1983, I was on Congressman Al Gore's Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of Science and Technology. He is a gifted, bright, and brilliant man who is recognized in this field of environment as much, if not more, than any other living American. And we had a long discussion about all sorts of options and the state of play involved in this. It was only after we left that the serious negotiations, pen to paper, took place, and the announcement was made of what they had agreed on and what they had not agreed on. I would say, just by way of kind of general comment, what we agreed to was necessary but not sufficient. There is still much more that needs to be done. And the lukewarm, if not cold, response of India and China are not encouraging. They are major players when it comes to carbon and emissions, and they do not envision a path at this point that has them, for example, in India, leaving coal behind anytime soon. I'm just afraid. I think the clock is ticking, and I'm afraid if we don't move very quickly in dealing with this, it may be too late, or the consequences may be too dire. There is also a general feeling of the poorer nations, particularly the island nations, that they were not being embraced but only abandoned, that they were considered to be too expensive to have the major powers accepting financial responsibility, and maybe too far gone to be saved. To be very blunt with you about that. In some cases, I'm afraid that's true. But taking it back home here, it was interesting in the week before we went to Glasgow to listen to the speeches on the floor. I continued to be so saddened and angered by the response of the Republican Party to this international crisis that we face. There was a time when we were dealing with the McCain-Lieberman bill on the environment, and it was a bipartisan measure headed up by a major Republican and many others. That's hardly the case anymore. We can get some assistance from the Republican side, but generally they spend their time trying to dampen our efforts and to ridicule all the planes that were flying and all the aviation fuel that was being burned on this Glasgow conference. So there's little or nothing to encourage us. When it came to the infrastructure,
I was just going to say, let's turn back to Capitol Hill as you are and talk a little, Senator, if you would, about the big success you've had. You were deeply involved in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It passed. It's going into law. What does that do for climate? What does that do for transportation? What does that do for Illinois?
Well, for transportation,
some of the progress.
Art, I'll just tell you, I remember when it was May of 2019, and I was in the cabinet room of the White House with other members of Congress, awaiting the arrival of President Trump for a follow-up meeting on his infrastructure bill. He was 15 minutes late. He walked into the door. I was standing next to him. He happened to come in right where I was standing. And he said, pointed at Nancy Pelosi and said, "As long as you're investigating me, there will be no infrastructure bill." Wheeled around and left. That was literally the end of the conversation on infrastructure for 4 years. And now we managed to put together this bipartisan effort, which I played a very minor role in, but it was happy to see emerge. And at least 10 senators, 5 Dems, 5 Republicans, came together with a bill. It was not as strong as I'd hoped when it came to the environment, but it was a step in the right direction in many respects. Building in resiliency and investment in the electric grid, not enough in electric vehicles. We hope to do better when it comes to Build Back Better. Efforts underway, and some investments that really make a difference in the Chicagoland area, for example. The amount of money we're investing in transit is at record-breaking levels. And that means to me that we're going to give people alternatives to regular transportation in cars and trucks. And that, I think, is money well spent for a lot of different reasons. We also have investments in so many different varieties of transportation. I think we're going to modernize our transportation as well as our power grid in the process. Money is going to flow at a large level, large numbers, at a very high level. And I think it's going to enhance Governor Pritzker's Build Back program for the state of Illinois.
You know, as we've discussed a number of times, the transportation sector now contributes more greenhouse gas than the energy sector does. And your point about public transit, we've said it before, if you don't have good public transit in Chicago, you don't have a green city. We've got to have better public transit. Can you talk a little bit about, a little deeper on what the infrastructure bill means when it comes to Amtrak, you know, where Chicago is the center of Amtrak nationally, and you've been a leader on that, higher speed rail, and how that ties into Build Back Better?
Well, I can tell you, I was born downstate to a railroad family. Mom, dad, two brothers, and I all work for the railroad. So it's in my blood for whatever that's worth. And I believe in Amtrak. And there was a time when Amtrak was proving itself very well before this COVID-19 pandemic. And now we are going to make the investment that should be made to modernize Amtrak. There are other things we need to do on a policy viewpoint, but you may have noticed some new engines showing up on the Amtrak trains, which will be more fuel efficient and certainly more modern efforts. Now I think they're going to do the passenger cars as well. That is long overdue, decades overdue, that we make the image of Amtrak 21st century image. It is stuck in the 20th century and it's time to change it. That's not always been easy to do. There have been more people on the other side of the aisle calling for the end of Amtrak than calling for any investment in it. So with transit, I think that is critical. It can make a big difference.
The infrastructure bill also has money in for electric school buses. And you know, the Environmental Law and Policy Center has worked with your staff for a long time on that. Lion Electric is coming to Illinois with a manufacturing plant for electric school buses. You know, how do you see that piece fitting together? A few years ago, most people weren't talking about electric school buses, you know, and today we have a chance to be sort of the center of it. Is that gaining momentum? How do you see that playing out?
Well, again, I don't want to make this partisan, but our efforts when it came to electric vehicles were not encouraged on the other side of the aisle. But Build Back Better will make that commitment. What we did manage to include were charging stations, an investment, massive investment, which we will need in charging stations. You know, I think part of the hurdle that needs to be cleared by electric vehicles is the range anxiety, as they call it. I still think that is a concern. My wife and I were looking at the current vehicles available and wondering how many trips between Springfield and Chicago she could make safely in that circumstance. We opted
Getting practical there, just
very,
you know,
very
how does it play out in people's real lives?
Well, we made a decision, and I view it as an interim decision. We bought the last Lincoln hybrid car that they built, so we could get double the gas mileage out of our vehicle. But I told her, I said, I think this is going to be the last gas vehicle we ever buy. The next one has to be electric. So we're moving in that direction. And what is happening is nothing short of remarkable. To think that Rivian has emerged with an IPO that I believe has funded them with more money than Ford Motor Company or something of that nature, it's some startling statistic of that nature, is an indication of the future as far as I'm concerned. Rivian in Normal, Illinois, took over the plant of Mitsubishi, which was closed 6 years ago, and they have 2,000 plus workers on the job. Amazon's made a big investment for electric delivery vehicles, and I was able to, about 6 weeks ago, to go out and test drive one of their SUV trucks. It's impressive as can be. Now it's going to cost $70,000 just in case, I don't want you to be facing sticker shock. But when you get to the other vehicles involved, I've spoken to people from Lion Electric. They're out of Montreal, and they have an ambitious plan to build those buses. And the more effort we put into that, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Because that, to me, is the type of thing that's obvious. Those are short runs for most of those buses, and they can charge overnight and be ready. In addition, we have a plant up in McHenry County called EV Box, which I think is out of the Netherlands. I may be mistaken, but they do electric charging equipment for electric vehicles, and they're the largest company doing it in Europe. And I've talked to them, and they have ambitious plans. Don't forget Argonne National Lab. which has been a leader in the nation, if not the world, in battery technology, which is the bottom line here. More to follow. I'm glad to see everybody jumping on board the bandwagon. I was happy to be on it myself about the future of electric vehicles in Illinois. The governor's done some extraordinary things, dedicating funds for training and such, so that people would be able to work in this field. Our unions are looking at this in very practical terms. The electrical workers, they see it coming, and they're preparing people in apprenticeships to install these charging stations. There are lots of opportunities for us here. The one disappointment, I was looking for a commitment from Ford Motor Company that they would convert their South Cook County facility into an electric vehicle production operation. They haven't made it yet, but we want to keep urging them to do just that.
You know, I got to tour the Lion manufacturing facility in Montreal, but I haven't gotten to drive a Rivian truck yet. You get to do the cool stuff. But Ford is now making an EV Mustang. I mean, think about
Yes.
that. The muscle car, the Mustang, is now an EV. I mean, it shows you how much the world is changing on this. And the supply chain point you're making and the union labor point and how do you train workers for the jobs of the future is absolutely vital. Build back better. What's going to happen? What do you think?
Boy, that's a good question.
Everybody wants to know. You're our leader in the Senate.
Well, let me
What's
tell
going to
you,
happen?
the first, it's so complicated. I'll try to make it simple. The first move is for the House, and we think it may occur even this week. At the end of the week, they may take up the bill. And if they do, I'll applaud them for doing it. It's a superhuman effort. And it means that they will establish the benchmark we start with. We take the House bill to the Senate parliamentarian. We go through it, and she looks at it from a variety of different angles as to whether the provisions are consistent with the law and the procedures of the Senate. And they are very arcane rules written by Robert Byrd over the decades when he was engineering the very best for West Virginia every day of the week. And we live with them today. The reason why it's important, everybody I think knows by now, is that if we face a filibuster, we need 60 votes. We don't have it. We have 50. If we face reconciliation requirement, it's a majority vote. Well, with Kamala Harris to the rescue, we have enough if we have all the Democrats. We've got to convince Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema to play ball with us. It's meant some major changes, but I think we're reaching a point where we can see something significant coming out of it. And I would tell you, when it comes to the investments and Build Back Better in the environmental side, they are significantly better than even the infrastructure bill. And they go deeper into the money that's going to be spent for that purpose. Now, there's some gaps and omissions in it. Electric power generation should have been more explicit in terms of what we're striving to do. But Joe Manchin wouldn't buy it. I'll just be very blunt with you. So we had to say, all right, what can we do? Sheldon Whitehouse and my friends, Brian Schatz and Martin Heinrich, do believe that we're at least in the ball game for a carbon fee, which I think is the only realistic way to use market forces to achieve our goal in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I support it, and I was on a telephone call with some CEOs a few weeks ago, and one of them was the CEO of British Petroleum. And I said, you support carbon fees? We do. We think this is the future. We want to be part of that future. So things are changing for the better in some respects, and I haven't given up that the Build Back Better will be the vehicle to do that.
You know, we just have to have a little bit of fun. Of course, the parliamentarians' ruling on the Senator Byrd arcane rules is called the Byrd Bath, right?
Of course, yes.
just for fun, in case people don't know the delightful term there and where it came from. You were talking for a minute about the Great Lakes, and we can't have this conversation without talking about the work you've done to protect the Great Lakes. The infrastructure bill has an additional $1 billion for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. How do you see that playing out and Build Back Better? Is protecting and restoring the Great Lakes an area where you really think that Democrats and Republicans can work across the aisle. Yeah. Is
I'm
that that
hopeful.
area that maybe it can get done?
I hope so, and I, Howard, I can't tell you what this means to me personally, because you and I have worked together on it for so long. But my wife and I have a little apartment that overlooks Lakeshore Drive, and we can see the lake. And for flatlanders with a world of cornfields around us downstate, it's still a treat. For so many years, we've gone up to Chicago and stayed in a place there, drinking coffee and wine, and just looking at that beautiful lake and what it means. But it's near Belmont Harbor, and there is an area called Dog Beach there. It's a tiny little area
Yep.
there. And I measure the situation in Lake Michigan by Dog Beach. Is it disappeared? Well, and it just about has. And if you'll remember that, I just wanted to find these statistics to share with you. You know them already. The drought in 2013 caused Lake Michigan's water level to reach an all-time record low, leaving marinas unable to operate, creating issues for moving freight. Within a year, lake levels would climb and eventually reach an all-time high in 2020, a 6-foot increase in 7 years on Lake Michigan. Now, we have some close friends, lucky us, who have a place up in Leelanau, in the northern part of Michigan. We go up to their place, and I tell you, they've gotten the crap kicked out of them in the last 2 years. Disintegrations at the beaches and all the things that go with it. And so there's little we can do about the volatility of the lake, but there's a lot that we can do about invasive species. I started this quest and people laughed at me. They wouldn't even hide their laughter. I said, I got to stop that damn fish. We don't want the Asian carp in Lake Michigan. Will be the end of that aquaculture as we know it. And so we've managed to do it. We believe we've done it so far. We spent a lot of money doing it, and there's a lot more to be spent, but it's worth the effort. And we're getting multi-state cooperation in that regard. We have to be also talking about resilience. We talk, in hushed tones about the poor situation in Miami, where the water is rising. Well, we've got to think about the same challenge in communities around the Great Lakes, that they could face the same phenomena if they're not careful. I think it's money well spent. There's $1 billion in the Build Back Better effort to go into the Great Lakes restoration. And I'm going to be dogging the agencies to make it timely.
Terrific. I remember a conversation we once had about Asian carp, on the sort of things of, if I woke up in the morning one day on an environmental issue and I read the news and it was really bad, what would I look at and say, why in the heck didn't we do something about it? And that's Asian carp getting into the Great Lakes. It's preventable to a large extent, but once Asian carp get in any significant manner, the economic costs, the environmental costs are huge. And thank you for all the work you've done of cajoling, encouraging, and sometimes more with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to get going and really do what they need to do quickly, or more quickly than they usually proceed.
Can you give me 30? Can you give me 30 seconds on the dirtiest ship on the Great Lakes, the SS
Senator,
Badger?
I know where you're going. You have 45 seconds or a minute or whatever you'd like.
I'm going to make it very brief. When I heard about this miserable auto ferry going between Wisconsin and Michigan, coal-fired ferry, the last one on the Great Lakes, that was dumping coal ash overboard as it trekked across Lake Michigan, I went into a form of a rage, which ultimately took several years to accomplish. But, we decided that the solution was they were going to hold the coal ash and somehow dispose of it on shore. But that damn thing is still moving, and it ought to be changed dramatically. It is a blight to the environment from every respect, and I wouldn't be surprised to find that some of that coal ash is still finding its way into the lake.
Literally 1 million pounds of coal ash containing toxic chemicals was being dumped in Lake Michigan. And Senator, without your getting involved in it, nothing would have gotten better. And you helped stop it and change it. I share your fear that we really got to look at what they're actually doing all the time. Trust but verify. But thank you for your leadership on the SS Badger and getting that one cleaned up. I know you've been very generous with your time. So what would you like to wrap up with?
Well, let me tell you, we got work to do, and we've got a president who cares, and we've got to seize the moment and move this as quickly as possible. We're lucky to have good people in his administration. Deborah Shore is now EPA Region 5 administrator. I trust her completely. She is bright, she's determined, and I believe that she's going to be a real asset on our side. But never overlook the importance of public education. I hearken back, and I've told this story, Howard, to a moment in time when I would get in the station wagon with my kids in the back seat, and we would start to take off, and I'd turn on the ignition, and one of the kids in the back seat would say, "Buckle up, Dad." They said every damn time. And pretty soon I buckled up every time I got in the car. It's little things like that where the kids knew that it was the right thing to do and wanted their moms and dads to know the same thing. The same thing is true on the environment. We should never overlook the importance of educating young people about what this world's going to look like if we don't do something in our generation. Now, the young woman from Sweden, and God bless her, Theta Grunberg, whatever her name may be, I met her one time. I'm glad she's making noise at it, but we've got to do the same thing in this country. Enlist the young people in our cause, educate them, and they will help move our generation, their parents and grandparents, in the right direction.
Senator, thank you very much for all you do on behalf of the people of the state of Illinois, but more broadly, what you're doing nationally and globally on climate solutions, protecting the Great Lakes, and for the environment. I wish you and Loretta a very happy Thanksgiving, and to all who joined us, have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you to Illinois Senior Senator Dick Durbin.
Thanks a lot, Howard.